good evening. Welcome to our second Zoom discussion, Becoming One People, a discussion about the role of literature, art, theater, storytelling, and music in strengthening democracy. Becoming One People started as a book release celebration of Michael Fine's The Bull and Other Stories. That first was so well attended and so successful as a fundraiser for 8 different great community organizations that we decided to repeat it, only change it a little and grow and broaden the discussion. The American story as a story of one people is a story still evolving. Many of us are the children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren of immigrants. Others are descendants of slaves. Still others are descended from native peoples whose lives and cultures were changed forever when settlers arrived from foreign places. Some of us in Rhode Island are descended from mill workers, others from mill owners, geomen, farmers, from craftspeople, nurses, doctors, lawyers, teachers, police, firefighters, store owners, plumbers, electricians, from bricklayers, and from bricklayers' helpers. But all our families have something important in common. We all struggle together to build a place for ourselves here and to make the future for our children and ourselves better than the past. The urge, the struggle together to make the future better than the past has been called the voice that is great within us, the voice of the angles of our better nature. Sometimes, in a democracy of contending voices, in debates that can turn shrill and partisan, that voice that is great within us gets drowned out, and we think only of our disagreements instead of what draws us and holds us together. But our artists, musicians, and writers, our actors, storytellers, sculptors, and filmmakers are the keepers of that great voice. They listen and they hear America singing, even when the rest of us get distracted. They hear the voice that hums under and over our politics and our culture, calling us to heed to the famous angels of our better nature. It is that voice we want to think about and discuss tonight as we consider how to respond to the people who want to divide us, not unite us, and how to keep the speech of actors and writers or singers and storytellers free speech so we can protect this democracy best by rising our voices together. Thank you for joining us. My name is James Diossa. I am the former mayor of Central Falls and now a senior advisor at the Brown Policy Lab. And I'm happy to join all of you tonight and more importantly to support my great colleague and friend who helped me tremendously in my last year in office through the pandemic, and that is Dr. Michael Fine, and his generosity to not only the people of Central Falls, but the state through his expertise, I think has been critical in this fight against the virus. But more importantly, we know that he has a big heart and he wants to further conversations of unity and support all those in need. So I want to thank Dr. Michael Fine for the opportunity to join all of you tonight and help host and moderate tonight's discussion. Many thanks to the Providence Community Libraries, the Learning Community, Rhode Island Black Storytellers, Project Help CV, Adams Public Library, and Community Care Alliance of Rhode Island. Great community organizations and great partners in putting together tonight's program. Please help support them any way you can. The appropriate links are in the chat. We're going to start by asking Michael Fine and the rest of the panel to talk about this complicated story, the story that led us to function together as one people. Then I'll ask the panel a set of new questions, so please send me your questions in the chat. But let me introduce our special guest, Dr. Julien Ayotte. After over 40 years in career, 40-year career in business, is a fiction writer who has published 7 novels in 8 years, all of them award-winning bestsellers. His novel, A Life Before, earned him the Book Life Prize presented by Publishers Weekly in 2016. Paul Caranci, best-selling author of Wire and Scoundrel, says, without doubt, Julien Ayotte is the best writer of mystery thriller novels in Rhode Island. A signed Ayotte novel will make a great gift for your favorite reader. So you heard that loud and clear. Get a gift. Dr. Ayotte will be the featured speaker of July 20th, 2021 at the Wright Museum of the World War II in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. He previously was the keynote speaker at the 45th reunion of the Air Force Escape and Evasion Society in 2019 in Niagara Falls. Val Tutson is a multiple award-winning storyteller who has been performing in schools, churches, libraries, festivals, and conferences since 1991. She draws her stories from around the world with an emphasis on African traditions. Her repertoire includes stories and songs she learned in her travels to South Africa, her experiences in West Africa, and stories from African American history. She's a graduate of Brown University, where she earned a master's degree in theater arts and a bachelor's in her self-designed major of storytelling as a communications art. Shoshana Feinstein was a director and instructor at her Renaissance Music Center, where she offered private classes in voice, piano, music theory, composition, and theater. As a proponent of the bel canto technique, her successful integration of the school and popular music enabled her to successfully impart her knowledge to her students, regardless of what their genre of singing style. Miss Feinstein has extensive recording experience, including having worked with producer Martin Birch in Munich at the Musicland Studios, with Ronnie James Dio and Richie Blackmore on the Rainbow albums, well as Artie King at the Record Plant in Los Angeles. She composes her own music and has released Everlasting Joy, a compilation of love songs that she has written for weddings, which is available on iTunes and Amazon. Erminio Pinque, educator, illustrator, fabricator, and performer, is the recipient of the 2018 Carter Fellowship for Entrepreneurial Innovation, and with that support, formed the Space Transformation Station, a satellite studio of the Big Nozzle Lab that has been, until recently, based in the Intermodal Transportation Center in downtown Providence, Kennedy Plaza. The STS transforms empty storefronts, sidewalks, streets, schoolyards, and farms by jump-starting interactive alien robots, fabrication and performance activity powered by local artists, collaborators, and members of the public. The STS crew has produced theatrical online videos and has partnered with community organizations to support the installation of public art, cleaning of vegetables, promotion of safe mask use, voters' rights awareness, and advocacy for transit, housing, and civil rights initiatives. And the one and only Dr. Michael Fine is a writer, commentator, community organizer, family physician, and public health provocateur. He's the author of 5 books and many short stories, including Healthcare Revolt, How to Organize, Build a Healthcare System, and Resuscitate Democracy, all at the same time and abundance. A romantic thriller set in Rhode Island and in Liberia in the aftermath of the Liberian Civil Wars of 1989 to 2003. His new book is called The Bull and Other Stories. So I'm going to take a few seconds just to say the backgrounds in Spanish, practice my Spanish here. El doctor Julien Ayotte ha sido un trabajador de negocios por más de 40 años, ha escrito libros y ha publicado 7 libros en 8 años. Muchos de ellos han recibido reconocimientos. Tenemos a nuestra amiga Val Tutson, que ha ganado muchos reconocimientos por compartir sus historias y ha podido compartir esto en las escuelas, las iglesias, las bibliotecas, festivales y en conferencias desde 1991. Ella ha sido inspirada por sus tradiciones africanas y parte de su repertorio ha sido inspirado por sus viajes a Sudáfrica, África del Oeste y las historias de la cultura afroamericana aquí. Ella es una graduada de Brown University y está aquí para compartir con nosotros. Shoshana Feinstein es una fue directora e instructora en su centro de música llamado Renaissance. Ella allá ofreció clases privadas de voz, piano, teoría de música, composición y teatro. Ha tenido muchos trabajos con personas muy conocidas en este mundo de la música. Y por último, ha sacado un álbum que se llama Everlasting Joy, que es una compilación de música, de canciones de amor y que está disponible en iTunes y Amazon. Erminio Pinque es un educador, fabricador, persona muy innovadora, que hace muchos programas en nuestras escuelas, en diferentes partes de nuestras comunidades. Usa oficinas que no están siendo usados para crear un programa interactivo para informar a nuestras familias, nuestros vecinos sobre diferentes actividades o diferentes iniciativas como la promoción de vegetales, cómo usar la máscara, saber un poquito más de sus derechos para votar y mucha abogacía para el tránsito, vivienda y la parte de los derechos civiles en nuestro estado. Y por fin termino con el doctor Michael Fine, que no es solamente un doctor ni un amigo, es escritor, comentarista y un organizador comunitario. Y también es un doctor y como lo he mencionado, ha escrito muchos libros. Este último libro se llama The Bull and Other Stories. So I practiced my Spanish there. I will now turn it over to our great friend, Dr. Michael Fine.
Thank you, Mayor Diossa. And thank you all for being with us tonight. Just a quick note on the translation, for which we have great thanks to Mayor Diossa again. We would love to be able to technologically do closed captioning for Spanish and for Creole, and aim to get there someday with one of these Zooms. We keep working on it, but I think a number of us think it's important to have different languages, because so many Rhode Islanders are not native speakers of English. And this way we include them. And it also gives speakers of English a feel for what it feels like to be in a world where your native language isn't spoken. Rhode Island is a state that now speaks mostly English and Spanish. In my memory, I remember when Rhode Island spoke mostly English and French. And certainly my grandparents came here speaking English and Yiddish. And most of us, I think, have families who have learned different languages as time goes by. And I always think it's a good idea to remember that as we learn to talk to each other as one people. So thanks again to Mayor Diossa for doing that. Also to Alex for being our amazing producer, to Dr. Ayotte, Erminio, Shoshana, and Valerie for being part of this discussion, and for taking the time to talk about democracy, freedom of speech, and how what unites us is so much more important than all the forces that are pulling us apart. Thanks as well to our partner organizations tonight, the Providence Community Libraries, Project Health CV, the Learning Community, the Community Care Alliance, the Adams Memorial Library in Central Falls, and Rhode Island Black Storytellers for all the work you all do every day, and for joining us tonight. We came to tonight's Zoom when stories threaten democracy and freedom of speech after the success of a similar Zoom about 2 months ago, one called What is Our Story? Stories to Protect Democracy. It was a great night and a great discussion. I learned a tremendous amount, and I really loved how Ricardo Pitzwiley framed the American story. He said something like, and I'm paraphrasing, that we are one people who took some ideas about freedom, free speech, dignity, and democracy that were designed for really just a few people. And we keep finding out that more and more people want to be in. We keep growing as a people when those who want to be included in those ideas and ideals can join us, sometimes because they are invited, but often because of their struggle, successful struggle to be included, even though that struggle is not always brief and certainly not easy. We go too slowly, we get distracted, and sometimes get co-opted, but as a people, we keep at it. We keep pushing the envelope again and again, imperfectly and unequally, remembering what, I'm never sure whether it was Winston Churchill or Abba Eban said about us as a people, which is that you Americans usually get the right answer after you've tried all the other ones. But something, as good as that discussion was, something bothered me about that discussion about 2 months ago. The amazing panelists we had, all of whom I had actually chosen, they're all great people with great ideas, but I hadn't given enough thought to making sure that we heard from artists and writers from across the political landscape. And that one-sidedness was unfortunate, not because of the discussion. The discussion was good and rich, but because if we're going to be one nation, we have to make sure that we're hearing and listening to everyone on all sides and not blot out what anyone's thinking or feeling, regardless of who agrees or who disagrees. Because this nation in 2021, in this nation in 2021, we are really all at each other's throats and divided, and that division weakened us. We couldn't agree, for example, on how to approach the pandemic, and that division likely cost us 500,000 lives. Other places were able to deal with this virus much more effectively than we were, and our failure to do that really reflects our political differences more than anything else. We couldn't agree on how to approach the pandemic. We can't agree often on the truth. Families now sometimes can't talk to one another. People don't want to go out on dates with people they might disagree with. We don't live together. We don't talk together, and no longer even know one another. And too many of us think we don't like or trust the people we don't know, even though we are nowhere near as different as some of us may think, which is a tragedy, because my sense is that we actually agree on way more than we disagree about. Few of us are as single-minded as our politics suggest. Most of us have a collection of different ideas. I'm a huge fiscal conservative, for example. I happen to really distrust big government. I like small government. What does that make me? I'm not sure. It certainly doesn't make me fit comfortably in any political party. And it makes me want to listen and learn from everyone. That said, I'm still bothered by how pundits on both sides, on the left and the right, always spin things to make the other side look bad so that you'll send them money. I get the emails from everybody, which I guess means I'm mostly confused. But the emails are really bothersome because they are all on both sides, always distorting what I take to be a reasonable facsimile of the truth. And they're doing it as a way to generate passion, perhaps, votes, perhaps, but I think they often do it as a way to generate income for themselves, and that's a disaster. They call it spinning, and maybe that's one way to say it, but another way to say it is lying. And what's really disappointing is that that kind of lying publicly has become acceptable in American life in 2021. So these emails come all the time. Both sides engage in it, and they divide us so they can put themselves forward. Divide and conquer. That's what we've got. We got divided. The old virus could walk in, kill 500,000 of us, and make a mess out of our lives for a few years. But literature, storytelling, art, and performance, in my view, are completely different. At the end of the day, people who do those things are actually about telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and about doing it in ways that aren't about choosing sides. To pick up something Valerie's daughter said before the formal Zoom started, long ago in a country or galaxy far away, gives us the space and time to see ourselves and our lives through a different lens, to look at and see what matters, to look at and see one another and how much alike we really are, how human we are, and how a culture that doesn't acknowledge this is completely missing the boat. Music does the same thing in a different way. Immanuel Kant, called music the quickening art. A song, an aria, a violin concerto, or a little rock and roll can shake us all up and shakes us all up equally, or bring us all equally to tears. And none of that depends on who voted for who, or who is running for what. The same thing is true of a painting, a film, or sculpture. So what do we do when stories threaten democracy and the freedom of speech? I think we keep writing and telling and performing and singing and painting so we see ourselves as one people, indivisible after all. Now let me introduce Dr. Ayotte. Take it from here, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fine. Freedom of speech is defined as the principle that supports the freedom of individuals to articulate their opinions and ideas without fear of retaliation, censorship, or legal action by the government. It is a human right, but it is not absolute, nor should it be. And sometimes it hides under the guise of libel, slander, obscenity, incitement, insurrection, etc. Those people who hold power over other members of a civilized community should use freedom of speech only to prevent harm to others and not to provoke harm. In today's world, this is often forgotten. We tend to confuse the right to free speech not as being permissive, but as something of an entitlement. Good most often triumphs over evil, but evil is in the mind of the reader. I write novels, and sometimes people get away with crimes. That's a reality of today's civilization. Years ago, books and movies always had a happy ending, a very unrealistic occurrence in today's world. I'm not so sure we are smarter today than when I was a youngster in the 1940s. We never locked doors to our homes and cars back then. We had no alarms or cameras all over the place. And guess what? We survived. We're still here. Lack of direct communication has contributed to people being more isolated. That's why I love book signings, where I can interact directly with people and get my message across face to face with my readers. I don't use Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or any other social access to inform the thousands of my friends what restaurant I went to last night, or to ask people to pass on some message or face the fear that I'll be judged badly if I don't. Too much useless information is found on these pages. But hey, it's freedom of speech. So people put on there a lot of junk. Far too many people over the years have been excluded from free expression, especially women who were abused and who feared coming forward to speak freely. Women have been excluded far too often for their contribution to humanity and peace. I always include strong female characters in all my works. Things are changing for women as they finally stand up to challenge those in power like never before. It is okay to be different, to disagree. It is not okay to bully people to get your point of view. I have made it a point to never speak about religion and politics among friends. It's how you lose friends. During World War II, after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, many Japanese Americans were incarcerated for months as if they had done something to do with it. This past year, we heard that the COVID virus likely came from Wuhan, China, and the frustration after living and dying with the virus, no doubt, has contributed to recent attacks on Asian Americans. Would we have reacted the same with others had the virus originated in Italy or France? Stephen Hawking, a brilliant English theoretical physicist, made this statement on facing the uncertain as he lived with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. When we see Earth from outer space, we see unity and not division. We are here together, and we need to live together with tolerance and respect. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I jump in?
Erminio, you're up.
Okay.
You're up.
Well, thanks for having me on this panel. I'm somebody who works in the theater arts, but a crossover with the visual arts. So I'm basically drawing pictures or doing puppet shows or wearing masks. And very often that's considered to be someone who's living in an alternative reality, so it's always great to have a panel in which we're kind of connecting real world issues with those who are sometimes thought of as being maybe superfluous to society's main function. But those of us who engage in the storytelling arts, in educating, in expressing creativity and promoting creativity, I think we all know that, real life, whether it be the hard day-to-day realities or the political reality, is an improvisation. It is a giant story that's unfolding, and everybody, is playing a part. And we're all part of creating a reality that we're participating in. So, I think that what I can offer to this conversation is that it's very natural for every human, regardless of their interest, their broadcast interest in the arts, seeks a simplified version of the world, or they want to see how the complex pieces work. They want to be engaged in a making of a myth and seeing how they fit in it. And it's such a natural instinct, that I've seen with the young children that I began working with years ago. We would do puppet shows, and when someone has created an alter ego or an avatar or something that represents them, that they can project their personality into, or their hidden personality into, what happens is that there's this great kind of equal play stage. The bully in the class can now express their sweeter, more sentimental side. And the child who has been very shy, suddenly, a motor mouth who's also singing, opera and saying a lot and bossing people around. So it's interesting to see that the natural human instinct is to want to be who we are, but to also be something else. And in that seek of that, the quest for being something else, what we don't realize is that we're just trying to find our other selves, these other parts of ourselves that we can't always feel at liberty to expose. So, I mean, I'm just going to address the reality of where I am right now. I'm in a Zoom chat, but if I pull down my background, very carefully here, I'm in my laboratory, and I've got my good friend, Dr. Tremendanis.
Hello. I would have loved to have been on this panel, but I see that you've gone with this guy.
And then I also have a couple of Uranian aliens here who are tinkering with the robots behind me. So hopefully they won't distract. But I mean, already, by changing my frame, I can speak to something that I may have felt inhibited before. What people need to realize is that costume wearing is not just for the artist or the theater person. Underneath all our clothes, we are nude bodies. Let's not forget. And so every time you put something on, you are basically broadcasting a way you want to broadcast a feel of, a feeling of your spirit, or an aesthetic, whether it's conscious or not. You're going to put on a tie for some occasions, and you're going to wear, a tank top for others, So I think that how this relates to the political situation and this idea of freedom of speech and the difficulty of hearing out other voices that sometimes conflict with our own. I think that if we think of it as theater, if we think of it as a story that we're writing, and in the creation of this life of ours, which is the story that we live, there's some folks that enter that are in your tribe, and others that are mysteries, others who are antagonists. But if you know how it works with puppet shows and plays and writing songs, all these dynamics can be shifted by shifting your own response, by changing the setting, by introducing other players, by changing the balance and the proportion of who's thinking one way, who's thinking another. So, without getting too meta about it, we kind of create our reality. And if the reality is something that we feel is antagonistic, I think we have to take responsibility for how we can diminish ourselves from just being a critic who wants to kind of write off the show as being a disaster, or a writer and a co-collaborator, or jumping in with an interruptive song that could change the mood, or walk across the stage holding a plant for no reason so that everyone gets confused, and you're playing with Dada or vaudeville or traditional storytelling. And the more we bring our myths into this world, I think it neutralizes and it evokes a different response from those that you may have tapped a button into. So the main thing, I think, is, you have to sort of think of your own self as not being determinate. You're not a fixed thing. You haven't arrived at a situation where you know all, and you know what's right and what's wrong. And just that simple act of knowing that the script is developing, you're still in the show, there's characters that you don't understand yet, I think makes you empathetic, because you have to be a good listener to be someone who participates in a story. And you have to also realize that if it's exciting, like if it is a story, then the mind-numbing oppression you feel when things are going bad, you can recast that in your mind and say, let me in my little way open up some doors when many of them are shutting. So I really feel that my experiences having suited up in public and being part of a group, most currently, as was mentioned in my introduction, the Space Transformation Station, where these guys are running the show. What we do is we wear things. We put these things on our bodies, and it's kind of an armor and also an invitation. It deflects us from being recognized immediately and being summed up, by your age, your hairstyle, your race, the shoes you're wearing. We all know the deal. There's a lot of assumptions when you see somebody. So we're free of that. But instead of being voyeuristically copping out of life by just being in costumes and hiding, what we're doing is we're activating alternative realities. So if on your regular day, a parade of robots stops to help, a weird person in a wolf costume, pick up the groceries they spilled, and the groceries are actually absurd rocks and sticks. It's so strange and so unusual that I think it reminds everybody that this life is so much more than we can comprehend, and that we should lighten up, but also become more serious about the causes that allow for quality of life, like justice and preventing harm to others, and giving voice to those who aren't heard, and giving big ears to those who are speaking. So that's it in a nutshell. I look forward to any questions or any kind of instigation so I can continue my improvisation here.
Thank you so much, Erminio. And now I'd like to pass it on to Shoshana, please.
Well, bravo, everybody. Erminio, bravo. And I love your aliens in the background. I'm flirting with one of them over there. This is great. Everybody's been great. I also live in an alternate universe with my animals. I've always been a musician. I've traveled, I've performed, I've taught. It's been a nonstop journey my entire life. And over the last 7 years, I decided to move to a farm. And I have watched 3 different species coexist. I've watched equines, felines, and Orvis aries, which are sheep, rams, coexist with each other, eat together, play with each other. I have learned so much from animals. I wish I could bring them in here with me, and they would like to come in too. So thank you for that. So I wrote some things down about how I feel about freedom of speech. Throughout my life, music and theater have been my medium for freedom of speech. My vehicles of expression were performing, recording, and composing. I am also involved in producing music videos of my original compositions, which can be found on my YouTube channel, excuse me, Shoshana Feinstein. I got off all social media because of the division. It seemed that no matter what I put up, if I put up a picture of my horse and there was barbed wire in the background, I would be criticized. Was this because of my political persuasion? I don't know. But I got off. I couldn't take the toxicity and the disagreement. People are so angry today with the division. They're waiting on the edge of their seats to be offended. And that's not how I live my life. I found that the visual story I create through my music videos, accompanied by the music, is a powerful tool in communicating and reaching out to others. Music has the intuitive ability to heal and elicit a vast array of emotions that I have seen unite people. Music can also divide people through dissonances and cadences that vex the soul and create negative reactions in humans. We are all born sovereign beings. We all have a right to our freedom, regardless of race, religion, creed, or political persuasion. Censorship is the polar opposite of our freedom of speech. It is grounded in control and manipulation of others through a narrative of fear, anger, threats, and sometimes jealousy. Outside of communicating via music, I strive to listen to others. I listen. I have learned to listen. I think that's very important. I greet others with a smile. Now that we have to wear masks, I try to smile with my eyes because people need that. They're in fear. And I walk in peace. I celebrate kindness and gratitude. And I want to thank Dr. Fine and Alex and Mayor Diossa for this opportunity and everybody on the panel.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. Thank you so much. And I encourage our guests to please ask questions through our chat so that we can engage immediately after our final panelist, who is Valerie Tutson. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mayor Diossa and Dr. Fine and everybody else. There's so many things going through my mind. I want to say da kuona to everyone. Da kuona, da kuona, da kuona, moni. It means I see you with my eyes and my heart through this computer screen, and I greet you with respect. Since we spoke a little español at the beginning, mi español es solo poquito, pero es a little bit of Chichewa. But I love that greeting. When I was growing up, I grew up in a very small town in Connecticut called New Milford, Connecticut. We didn't have a mayor. We had a first selectman who was a farmer and who drove the school bus. I didn't know until I was in high school that my family was in the minority in more ways than one. We were one of the only families of color in the whole community, and we were also one of the only liberal families in town, in the Democratic Party, dare I say it. But I didn't really know what that all meant, because in our church family, everybody was family. And what I remember about my parents at that time was that, you know, my mom would go to church choir and sing with all her friends, and then they'd go to the bar afterwards and they would argue politics late into the night, and then everybody would show up for church on Sunday. And I tell you, I did not know until I was quite old that they should have been on opposite sides. I think about that a lot now as a real model for how people of differing perspectives can come together and find true humanity, and even still talk about what is hard and different. A few years ago, the big buzzword was all about finding like-minded people. And when I'm hearing that phrase these days, I'm really clear that that is something we need to put to the side and figure out how to come together with all kinds of minded people. So I have a couple of short little things short little stories that I'm not really gonna explain, but I'm just gonna offer. Once there was a man who was a well-learned man, and he wanted to find truth. He had studied and studied and traveled the world, but he was in search of truth. So he told his wife and his children and everybody he loved that he was leaving. And he packed a bag and he went and he traveled far away from everything he knew until he went way up on a mountain. And there on the edge of the mountain, there was a cave. And there at the entrance to the cave was an old wizened woman. Her skin was wrinkly and her nose was long. She didn't have all of her teeth and her eyes were crossed in a funny way. And she said, "Why are you here?" And he said, I'm looking for truth." She said, "Come on in." And so he went inside and he stayed for a year and a day, and he learned many things from this old woman. And finally he said, "I think I've learned enough and I'm ready to go. And I thank you so much for welcoming me here. And I've been here all this time and you've never told me your name." And she said, "My name is Truth." And he said, "Well, Truth, now that I've met you and now that I'm going back down the mountain and I'm going to share with everybody the things that I've learned, what do you want me to say about you?" And Truth said, "Tell them that I'm young and beautiful." And so it happened in a village that Truth and Lie were good friends. Well, I'm not sure if they were good friends, but they lived in the same community and everybody recognized them by the clothes that they wore. Now, Truth was sometimes suspicious of Lie. I'm not sure if Lie was suspicious of Truth, but one day they were outside and Lie said to Truth, "Look, it's beautiful out." And Truth did look, and indeed it was beautiful. The sun was shining, the flowers were beginning to bud, and they walked along. And as they walked, they came to a river. And when they got to the river, Lie said to Truth, "Hey, why don't we go swimming?" Truth was a little bit suspicious, but the river looked nice. And so Truth and Lie took off their clothes and they laid them right there on the riverbank and they went right into the water. They were having a good time swimming and swimming and swimming, and Truth closed his eyes and closed his eyes. And when Truth opened his eyes again, he realized that Lie was gone. And not only was Lie gone, but Lie had taken his clothes and put them on and was rushing back into the village. Well, Truth came up out of the water and was looking for his own clothes to wear and couldn't find them at all. And so Truth began running into the village naked as could be. And when the people in the village saw the naked Truth, they turned their heads and they closed their doors. Now, they say that Lie is running around dressed up like Truth, and Truth, this naked one, was trying to find a place to go. And because the doors were always closed, Truth found himself hungry and cold and left out. And one day, Parable and Myth were walking by, and they saw the naked Truth. And they said, "Come, Truth, come inside, and we'll give you some food and some warmth and something to wear." And so the naked Truth went inside, and Parable and Myth dressed up Truth in story. And Truth was beautiful. And when Truth walked through the village and came knocking at any door, the door was opened and story was welcomed in and shared.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you so much. Wanted to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat. But to get this conversation going, we had some questions that were sent prior this conversation, and I want to ask any of you to answer, whoever would like to answer. And one of them is, how can artists, musicians, storytellers, performers, and writers use metaphor and storytelling to help Americans connect to each other without getting expressively political or judgmental? Or any of our panelists?
Well, I think metaphor, just like what Valerie did, it was a beautiful story and it was bipartisan. I mean, it was beautiful, and she used the metaphor, and I loved it. Thank you. So the use of metaphor is very important. It's not, art isn't, sometimes we have to be blatant in your face, but subtlety, metaphor, myth, like Valerie mentioned, and our other artists here, through book writing and Erminio's Aliens, whom I love, his cast of characters, people will pay attention to that rather than a politician say. No offense, you, but
Don't worry.
I don't think people, I've sung the national anthem at a lot of rallies. I'm using this as an example. And people will come up to me and say, oh, you don't look like a conservative, or I never thought you were a vegetarian, or, so what does that look like? What am I supposed to look like? I'm me, and I have certain beliefs, and they're not all the same as everybody else's, but some of them are the same. So I think metaphor is the way to do it. One of the ways.
So I'll take it a step further and ask, how do we stay respectful without self-censoring?
That is such a good question. And I think one of our challenges in our American culture today is that we don't have enough facility with story to offer something that is metaphorical and respectful. One of the things that I remember vividly about being in Senegal at one point and sharing stories, and I was hearing all these folk tales and wondering, like, when are you going to tell some true stories? And what I can remember is that one of the men in the market where everybody was telling stories, I remember him saying, all of these stories hold truth. Right? So we don't have to necessarily hammer something on the head. And I think it's Emily Dickinson who said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Right? So, or the old adage of a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. There are so many ways to put things out there. Catch more flies with honey, but some might say catch more flies with some shit too. I don't know. But yeah, so, in our culture, we always want to know, we always want to define, this is truth. This is the truth, as opposed to really being able to understand that, where is the truth in what I'm hearing, whatever that is.
I wanted to add that,
Erminio.
About the subject of self-censorship. I think all of us, if we think about it, realize that we brace certain subjects or introduce difficult ideas to our loved ones or friends or strangers in different ways. Sometimes someone could be your closest person, but before you get right to the point, you're going to start to maybe bring up some subjects where you both see eye to eye on, and then remember some great times you had together, talk about what's going to be for dinner, and then drop the bomb about the thing that went wrong or the thing that has to change. And I think if that's a way of respecting and acknowledging that the other person is coming from somewhere else. It can also be dangerous, because when people think that, oh, I'm going to approach this person and do exactly what I described, but it's negative because you're assuming they need to be sweet talked or they need these things, so there's never a rule book. This is where people, I think, get into trouble, is that, they follow somebody's playbook and it backfires in their own household or on their street or with the person that they're having an issue with. You have to kind of be so ready to be conscious of what's going on and what's happening. And this increased sensitivity to kind of get to the point, I think, makes everybody a better person. And anybody who knows that you're going through those extremes, I think, is going to respect you more, or maybe be more open to, like, okay, look, I don't believe in any of these things and I don't like the way you're dressed, but I see what you're doing. You're acknowledging me, you're listening to me, and you didn't say no about who I am. So now tell me what your position is. And then you can be rubbing your chins and like, well, I see a little bit of what you're saying, but not that. And you can leave and then regroup to build that story together. So that's just the way to go.
Thank you, Erminio. And for you, Julien, my question is, how do we protect freedom of speech and freedom of expression most effectively?
Well, that's I take a look at the recent impeachment proceedings, and where different sides couldn't even agree on this particular subject. Individuals all had their opinions, whether you were Democratic, Republican, or independent, it didn't matter. But you had the right to express your opinion. And we, as citizens looking in on this ridiculousness on television for days on end, also had the right to express our own opinions of what we were seeing, whether we liked it or not. And there are probably almost as many people who liked it as those who didn't like it. And they had the right to express their own opinion. I think we need to get rid of all foreigners in this country. That's the statement that some people would make. And yet, if you really look at it, we are all foreigners, unless you're a Native American. I mean, we talk, my family, my mother came over on a boat from Belgium in 1919. My father's family comes from Canada. So what does that make me? It makes me an American. Other people came from all over the place. Dr. Fine mentioned how his family, you know, came from abroad, his grandparents or his parents, and probably Jim Diossa, the same would apply to you and to many of or everyone on this panel. So we can express ourselves and not be prosecuted for expressing ourselves. And so I think that is a way that we protect freedom of speech, is by having the ability to say what's on our mind, so long as it doesn't really directly intend to harm someone, because that's wrong. Freedom of speech, as I mentioned earlier, is fine. I think everyone should have the ability to express themselves, but not in a vindictive way. And I mentioned, you know, Stephen Hawkins, who's a guy who sat in a wheelchair for about 30 years of his life and couldn't even speak. He had to do it through some computer programs. And yet he knew enough to know that you have to be tolerant of others. So I think that if you are concerned about your words and they don't really offend someone, then say it. Say what's on your mind.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We're going to ask a few more questions, and then we'll transition over to Dr. Fine. Please, I encourage you all, if you have any questions, submit it via the chat. And if not, I will ask another question for the panel. Is it okay to write, sing, or act in the voice of someone who is from a community that you don't come from yourself?
Oh, cultural appropriation? You mean that?
Yeah. Let me take a stab at it, if I may. I think it needs always to be done with respect and honor, but without taking advantage of someone else's experience. But I think it's also important to try to imagine and understand the inner lives of other people. It's that process of understanding the inner lives of others that helps us be one people at the end of the day, that helps us walk in other people's shoes. It's hard to do it with integrity as a writer, important to do it with integrity as a reader. But and it needs consultation with people who are from that community to make sure that it's both accurate and real. But I think it's a valuable process and gives at least literature more strength if it's done and done with respect and dignity.
I'd like to add to that if I could.
Yes, please.
As a writer of fiction, many of my stories take the readers to places all over the world. And obviously, I've been fortunate in my lifetime to have been to a lot of these places that I take my readers to. And the biggest thrill I get is when I get a response from one of my readers who says, "You have taken me to a place that I have never been, nor will I ever get to. Now I feel like I've been there." That is for people I don't even know. And so I have made people feel good, and they could come from anywhere. What a thrill. I would continue to write forever with that kind of comments from people.
Erminio, did you
Yeah.
want to add?
I was going to say, it's definitely a bigger challenge for a writer, I think, because when you're reading a story, if you are completely drawn in to the character that you relate to, and then you realize that the writer is not in that demographic, I think because it's words and directly into mind, there can be a lot more extreme
right.
contemplation of how did they do it? How come I thought this was my tribe person, this person from my background? And I do think that there's no formula. If somebody is gifted, really can channel other people, based on their sensitive observation and immersement in a culture, that might be just an exception, but it's really hard to do. And it can, for those who really are inside that culture, it can go, whoa, this is well-meaning, but there's certain things here that don't really jive with the, that really relate to the people who are in that group. But in my case, one of the reasons that I've merged physical theater with my artistry, is that what I get to do is actually physically leave my body. As I mentioned about the hand puppets that the kids were doing in the beginning, we can put on different heads, different bodies. We can be a different species. We can be human. An old person can play a baby. A female performer can play an old white male academic, and during that performance, understand the different gaze that they're given, even though they're a bit of a cartoon character. They're not being looked at the same way that they would be with their particular age and race. So just speaking as a performer and my group, we all indulge in this, and it is absolutely euphoric to just lose yourself and be perceived as something else, and then to delve into your deepest sensitivities to deliver something that works, that does not, not offend or overreach, but just let people continue projecting onto what you're doing. So, the old saying, less is more, that can be in literature, in music, everything, where you let the audience finish the story, add the notes, sing the harmony, because you've composed it in such a way that allows participation. So I feel like in our group, we don't make realistic characters, because to do so would be like, that looks like a real person, and I know you're not that person. But if you're cartoonified or exaggerated or aesthetically abstract, and we could go on and talking about the different looks of different genres of art, we all know that there's abstraction, there's expressionism, there's so many different ways to portray something, that if you feel comfortable in that and you find a voice and it's universal, that I found it allows us to create body parts and shapes that allow us to feel empathy with people with those shapes and bodies, and then to know at the end of the day that we can remove these things. But that's a responsible act of reverence, I think. The intention is mixed in with the impact. And that's a whole huge conversation.
Makes me think about, something like what you're talking about, Erminio, where it's kind of masking and this, larger than life or mythic that gets you to the universal. And then I'm thinking of like the work of Anna Devere Smith, where here's one woman who has gathered stories of all different kinds of people, and she's stepping into, and that's her process, right? That then you step into the literal words of different people, and become, you don't become them, but it's that opportunity to try to bring forth their story in some hopefully respectful way. The word that's coming to me is humility. That if it's somebody else's story, like a real person or a real, or even a cultural story, but that the humility that comes to it. So you're bringing your gifts and your body and your voice in service to that experience. And I think actually that's what the arts does. Like those of us who engage in the arts, we're constantly crossing barriers. Like that's what we do. If you're going to sing in another language, you have to learn how to pronounce those words, or you have to learn how to play those instruments. And so, we need to bring the arts back for everybody, and it will help us to translate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Go. Sorry, Shoshana.
It makes me think of Madama Butterfly in the world of opera, Puccini's Madama Butterfly, where the female lead she's Japanese and she's heartbroken. And it's a double-edged sword, because I feel that Japanese women should perform this role. Although I had a chance to work with my teacher, who was Japanese, who loved Italian opera. He loved Italian opera, and he did a great job with it. And he, in turn, taught me about the Japanese culture and the honor. So I had a lot of respect for that culture and what Butterfly went through when she was abandoned by her, whom she thought who was her husband. So I got a chance to perform that in a small venue, and I had Japanese people in the audience. And because I was completely honored by doing this, and I sang it pretty well, and my teacher had me do it, I felt amazing that I was allowed to do this. But if there's a Japanese woman who can do it better because she knows the culture, then I think she should do it. And opera's changed a lot, so everybody's doing everything. But I think now they're using people, Carmen, for example, she's portrayed by Latinos and also, excuse me, my allergies, sorry, portrayed by Afro-American women, because Carmen, even though it's sung in French, she is from Spain. So, I think it lends itself better when you have that nationality. So I have great respect and honor for people who perform in their own culture and know their culture, but I also think we have to be open, like Val says, or Erminio says, that to learning, and Dr. Fine said, being humble and learning other people's cultures and performing them or writing about them.
Great. Thank you to our panelists for answering the questions. That was very thoughtful of all you to provide perspectives in your responses to the questions. I now would like the opportunity to turn it over to our great friend, Dr. Michael Fine, for a read of his book.
Thank you, Mayor. Though actually, I think I'm not going to read the story tonight. It's a little late. And I mostly want people to walk away with Val's story in their mind. That amazing story of Story and the Naked Truth.
Yeah,
That
that was awesome.
To me, there's nothing I can do or say that would come anywhere near close to the value of that. The story is, I have a website, Michael Fine MD, and, podcasts. So the story that I was going to read, which is called Nero, is up on as a podcast and up on the website. So, feel free to read it, but mostly I wanted to express, and I think this word came up already, my reverence for the panelists and for the mayor and for Alex. I think what everyone heard tonight was just amazing, thoughtful, able decency. And I come away with that sense of reverence for being amongst this group, and thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. We have we've scheduled a third Becoming One People for tentatively for May 20th. We're going to talk about identity and assimilation, arts and democracy, and try to sort of puzzle through that with Ana Gonzalez of the Public's Radio. And I can't tell you how important I think these discussions are, and how thankful I am to all of you who came and participated, and to the panelists for being part of this, and also to the panelists and to everybody else for the work they do every single day to keep this democracy alive. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.